Hello and welcome to the message for the 25th of April. It's taken from John chapter 21, and there's also an undercurrent, so to speak, from the first few verses of Romans 6. You might like to find that for yourself and read it at some point. I'm going to do a particular thing with this. I want to make a comparison between the period of time that Peter and the others were in when the action of John 21 happened. And I want to compare it to our current period in the UK churches where the past has gone, as it were, but there's a new future about to open up in front of us, we trust, in which we will be able to resume life as churches that meet together physically to worship and do some other things together. That's our hope and our expectation in the next few weeks. So we've got a past, but we've also got a future, but the future hasn't quite reached us and the past has gone, and we're in this little period in between. I also want to draw then a comparison between Jesus's engagement with Peter in this passage and the significance of Christian baptism for us. Right now, it sounds a bit of an unlikely mix, but stick with it if you don't mind. I believe it'll work. What I'm noticing increasingly, and have noticed for some years, is something going on in a lot of Christians in the West. And I'm going to just call it, because I want to be quick about this, deconstruction with reconstruction. Sometimes the second bit isn't happening. Some churches, I believe, are not being very helpful, so the deconstruction happens but not the reconstruction. Not demolition. Demolition is to just destroy a person's faith or your own faith or how you live as a Christian or whatever. But what I see is happening is that for a very large number of people, now increasing number, we've developed our faith and our way of living it out based on past models of doing so that no longer completely work for us. And so what happens is we begin to deconstruct the structure of our patterns of Christian life, and perhaps to some extent some of the details of our belief. And then what we do, if this is a healthy process, is we go through it, but we reconstruct it. And so we dismantle some things which have been familiar, and we take a second look at them, and we put them back in a new order or a new style, and give our faith and our Christian life a new shape. It doesn't mean we've abandoned our faith. It means we've adapted to changes, and we are seeing the living word of God lead us into the future as the Spirit enables that to happen. So it's a very positive thing, but it can be a bit unnerving. And it can trouble people going through it. It can trouble people who don't wish to go through it. Now, Peter and the others are floating around on the lake quite early on in John 21. Peter says, I'm going fishing. They say, we'll go with you. And so there they are, drifting around on the lake. And why not? Because they're doing what any of us tend to do when we're not quite sure of the future, when the future is coming towards us but hasn't quite yet arrived. We plan to revert to the old normal. We seek the familiar to give us stability and a feeling that it's all okay, and we can cope because we know this world. Whereas the new future, that's got stuff we know in it, but it's got stuff we don't know, and we can be a bit, I'm not sure I'm ready for that. It'll take a bit of energy I'm not sure I've got, or commitment I don't know about, or whatever. So that's what I think is probably going on. It could be more mundane than that. Peter could simply be in the same situation many people are as a result of the COVID pandemic. The income situation had actually changed for them, and maybe he just needed the money. Or maybe he's just trying to use this interim waiting time well. What they'd been through is it's just out of this world. I mean, it's off the clock. So for 3 years, they had followed Jesus. It was an intense 3 years. During it, they had done a whole heap of deconstruction. They'd had to relearn their faith. They were still halfway through, or less than halfway through, relearning the basics of their faith under the guidance of Jesus when along comes Good Friday. Already they have been working so hard, full-on lifestyle, some rest periods, but mostly it was just demanding and demanding. And then Good Friday, of course, brutally arrests that whole scene. And they see the person who has been shaping them or reshaping them, helping them reconstruct, the person who's been challenging their old constructs, the person who they've been working with to bring love and healing and hope to the people around them, and so on. This man, this Lord, this person they believe in and trust is beaten up in front of them by public rejection, and is stripped and crucified, and is then just a body in the grave. And that's their Good Friday. And it must have been beyond shattering. We think of all that they've lost in what took place then. And then Easter Day, they discover that the person they know to be dead is in some sense, and they're a long way yet from working out in what sense, but in some quite real sense is alive. And this is very disorientating for anybody. And so they come into a situation exhausted, hopeful, then broken and destitute and filled with personal grief over the loss of a loved one, and then recharged with an impossible hope. And now what? What now? We're to wait until God's Spirit comes. What do we do meanwhile? How do we take it from here? I'm sort of mindful of, when I think of them out of that night fishing, of Noah and the family in the story from Genesis, where they're bobbing around on a flooded earth with the future of the living creation in their care, but nowhere to put it, for the dry land has not yet appeared. They're waiting, I guess. They're drifting. The past has irrevocably gone, but the new era has not quite yet arrived. That's the situation they're in, I believe, Peter and co. And I think that's a situation we can relate to, certainly in the UK churches, as we know that the past has gone and that some things have been changed, and that there's no going back to simply how it was 18 months ago. But we don't actually yet see the new future. It's not yet arrived, but inevitably we're a bit apprehensive about it. And so I thought what we should do is notice what Jesus does with Peter, and then reflect on that in terms of our own baptism. Here's what I mean. You see, the others went along with Peter when he said, I'm going fishing, but I think God went along with him too, this way, because God was planning for Jesus to take Peter through his original starting out with Christ again. That's what I want to do when I look at our baptism. Baptism marks our starting out with Christ. See, Peter was fishing when Jesus first called him. And now Peter has disappointed himself. He's disappointed Jesus, but he's disappointed himself bitterly, in terms of the fact that he said, it doesn't matter what they do to you, Lord, I'm there with you. Nothing is going to turn me away from being right there as your man. I'm right with you, Lord. But when it came to it, he deserted and denied even knowing who Jesus was. And so Peter must have been in a horrible condition. What have I done? I've invested myself for 3 years. I've done this and then just when I needed to show my dedication, it wasn't there. And I wasn't what I should have been and wanted to be so much. I failed. And I was going to be the leader. But can I be the leader now after that? So Jesus shows up on the shore cooking breakfast as they're returning home after a failed night's fishing. And he takes Peter back. It's like he's saying to him, Peter, remember when I first called you, you were a fisherman. Looks like you're a fisherman again. So let's start there. Remember, I called you from this and gave you a different life. You're bothered about the failure, 3 times denying me. So I ask you 3 times to match each of those denials with an affirmation that you love me. I'm not asking you to be great. I'm not asking you to be never failing ever again. I'm not asking you to promise that you'll always be strong and right, because Peter wasn't into the future. I'm just asking you, do you love me? And Peter says, Lord, you know I love you. With this whole thing, we wouldn't be here, and you know I love you. And so actually what it is a piece of divine therapy that reinstates Peter, as Jesus says, I called you to look after the others when I'm no longer around in the way that we grew used to over 3 years. I called you to be their leader and to feed them, to nurture them, because this business of growing as a disciple doesn't look after itself. You've got to be active. You've got to shepherd them. You've got to help them develop. They won't make it otherwise. This is the only church on planet Earth. It's got one church at the moment. You're in charge of it. All other church will come out of it. You are still in charge. Not anything to do with the failure. We've forgotten that's in the past. We've put that behind us. Peter, you love me. That's the point. Now, continue the work I called you into. In our baptism, we did some things, and let's quickly ask the Spirit to take us back through them. First of all, our baptism was an act of Christ, because it was Jesus who told the church and commissioned the church to baptize us. So if any of us are baptized, it's actually an act of Jesus, because he said to the church, you're my hands and feet and stuff now. You baptize in my name, on my behalf. You do the baptizing. But it's so strictly Christ who baptized us, and it's an act of Christ through the church. It was an act of your acknowledgement. Maybe if you were only yay big at the time, you then came to confirm that acknowledgement when you were old enough to do so in confirmation or some other reenactment, I don't know. But it is an act of, and if you were baptized as a believer rather than as an infant, it's an act of acknowledgement, of saying, I recognise who Jesus is. I acknowledge that he is Lord. I acknowledge that he is Saviour. I acknowledge that he died for us, that he was buried, that he rose again. He's the one that I look to. I don't understand most of it, but I acknowledge it. I recognise it. So it's an act of Christ. Then it's an act of your acknowledgement. Then it's an act of your identity. The baptized belong together. They're the community of Jesus. So when you were baptized, you not only acknowledged Christ, you entered into belonging to the church. That's what baptism marks. You now belong to the church of the baptized. It's an act of your commitment, in which you said, I recognize what you have done for me, Lord. I commit to you. You didn't promise to be perfect. You didn't promise never to fail. You just promised that however faultingly, however small it may be, you love him and you committed to him. We're preparing for change. The new season isn't quite upon us, but it's coming at us now, and we'll be here soon, we hope and believe. And it's going to be different. The past gives us the basis for our future. It's not our future. It's the basis for it. Now, until we enter into that new future, which actually will also be on the day of Pentecost, possibly, it's a season to use well. And I remind us of our simple commitment to form the community of Christ. Christ didn't command any worship services or anything very much, but he did command us to be baptized. And as we return to worshipping together, I'm asking us to remember the three things at Cannington and Westfield churches that go with our worship that we're committed to. One, that our worship will glorify God. So glorify God in a way that works now and into the future, based on many lessons from the past, but not simply repeating it. That secondly, in our worship, we, the people of God, will be built up as a body of disciples. So we'll attend to learning, we'll attend to teaching one another, we'll attend to encouraging one another, all those things. And thirdly, that in our worship, we will hope to draw other people towards Jesus. We'll, in other words, we'll worship in ways that people who've never been to church can get the hang of, can relate to, and can begin their journey along with us. Love is the only way for the baptized, and we're coming to a new time. We're going to make mistakes, but we'll make them together as the community of the baptized. We'll fall over and get it wrong, but we're going to do that knowing that Jesus doesn't say, "Did you make mistakes?" He says, "Do you love me?" God bless you.